The road to the Super Bowl for the Chiefs starts with the Jacksonville Jaguars. What can we expect? What do we need to know about this team? We're going to dig into them today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. It is officially game week. We are on the road towards the divisional matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Chiefs got some rest. I think that's uber important. We're going to talk about what that means for them and how they choose to attack this team all week long. We're going to start today here in a minute talking about the quarterback matchup, as it should be at the top of the list. We're brought to you today by our friends over at PrizePicks. They do daily fantasy sports right. 2 to 5 players makes an entry, and an entry can win 10 times its entry fee. You get 100% deposit bonus, not discount, on top of everything that you put in there with the Locked On code, and that's at prizepicks.com. Lot to hit here. I'm hitting all aspects of it, draft-wise, who's paying off, what's going where. This is going to be fun. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics, NFL 33, where you can find all the draft work as well as RGR football.
And I'm Chris Clark. Thank you all for listening. We do appreciate it. And go check out one of the other shows on the network. Maybe you go look at Locked On NFL, Locked On NFL Draft, one of those shows. You can check out Locked On Jaguars. Wig does a great job covering that team. So a lot of good information there about our upcoming opponents. And if you have not already on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can be notified when you get those coming out. And we also really appreciate any feedback on Spotify or iTunes. A lot to talk about when we start looking at this matchup and the Chiefs' road to the playoffs, or the Chiefs' road to the Super Bowl at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we weren't surprised. We went over it last night. This is kind of what we saw coming. But when you take a step back and you realize just how poorly the situation was all around Jacksonville, maybe in retrospect, I am a little bit surprised. This is the Chiefs team that's been in consecutive AFC championships game against the newcomer. And I thought that showed in the first half for the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Chargers. I don't know that that's completely worked out of the system. I know they settled down the second half. The quarterback in particular, we're going to talk about him versus Patrick here in a bit. But what's your impression about how well Doug manages that team and how mature they are to come into Arrowhead?
Well, really quick, I did pick the Chargers to win. I thought the Chargers would beat the Jaguars. I thought that they would play better. So just want to put that out there. I'm going to own that one. Sorry, still have a cough. Trying to get over that. When you start looking at the Jaguars, I will say when they play Kansas City, and I know we can't really take a ton from the last time they played because it was so long ago. Lots of different players playing, lots of different things going on. But the Jaguars started slow against the Chiefs in that game too. And then they started, right before the 2-minute warning or towards the 2-minute warning, they started getting going in offensively in the first half. And that's kind of what happened in this game against the Chargers. So maybe they just need to get to a point where they can make adjustments sooner. But really the reality is that there was several questionable calls in the Chargers game early. The one thing that we're going to be very curious about is how the refs are going to let them play. We did find out that they're not going to have Carl Cheffers or Clete Blakeman in this game, so that's a plus.
We're knocking on wood here that continues as well. But you bring up a really good topic. Like, we have to be prepared, especially after what we saw last week. And folks, we are recording this before Monday night, so take that with a grain of salt. Just the fact that playoff football is here, and it certainly did show in what was called and what wasn't called. And I think in some ways that plays into the Chiefs' hands, having physical corners in particular. In some ways it doesn't, because a lot of things were not allowed to really unfurl the way that they should on the offensive side. Where do you come down about where the state of officiating is right now?
Horrible. For as much as they pay these referees and as much as this league makes, the reffing should be better. It should be more consistent. And quite honestly, and I have to admit, I have not gone back to watch Orlando Brown or Andrew Wiley to see if this is the case with them. But quite honestly, one of the things that you see every single week is a left tackle or right tackle getting a little bit of a jump before the snap. And it's not being called. That's a little bit of a problem. That is an advantage that needs to be called. That's a penalty. So that's something to watch. The Jacksonville Jaguars left tackle did phenomenal against Bosa and Mac. Didn't allow any pressure. That's a problem if that continues against Kansas City. I do not expect it's going to. I think Kansas City will send pressure probably that way, and they will get home at some point. But that's going to be definitely something to watch. But you watch the referees and how things went about during the postseason games, and sometimes they let them play, sometimes they didn't. It just it's going to be real interesting to see what they decide to call and what they're not going to call this weekend.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I believe you're talking about Jamar Salyer. And there was an injury there. We saw him get replaced as well. Like, we got to make sure that we're up to speed about who's going to be in this roster, because I think that's going to be a question. On the Chiefs side, are we going to have Frank Clark? So that matchup there on that side may be something that actually becomes one of the storylines this week. We should know more tomorrow once they get on the field. But that's really, I think, pressure versus obviously protection is going to be the tale that sets up these two quarterbacks. And I think the quarterbacks are do you see any bigger storylines than the two quarterbacks themselves?
No, and I think the other thing that really sticks out to me about Trevor Lawerence is he seems very down to earth. And I know this is kind of silly, but I'll say it anyway. Right after within a day of winning the game that he won against the Chargers, he's spotted at Waffle House. He's
got to get your pancakes.
Guy. My point is that's something he's just going about his life, doing what he wants to do. And that sort of reminds me of Mahomes in a little bit. He doesn't seem to really think that this is all too big for him.
Yeah, that's fair. I like that aspect about him. And if I was going to choose one of them, clearly my thoughts are on Patrick. But if I had to start over and I had to take somebody from that class, I still feel like he's the guy to lead it. But we're going to talk about them head to head and what can affect their games coming up here in a second. But first, a word from our friends at PrizePicks, who are sponsoring this particular episode. And they have a great thing going. They do daily fantasy sports their way, and that helps out. Right now, the line for Trevor Lawerence is 245.5. The line for Patrick Mahomes is 295.5. All you have to do is go get the app at any of the app stores, whatever flavor you like, or go to prizepicks.com and sign up for daily fantasy sports. Then you check those lines. 245.5 for Trevor, 295.5 for Patrick. Then you decide, is that quarterback going to go more or less? Is the other quarterback going to go more or less? All you have to do is pair 2 to 5 players in an entry, and that entry can make up to 10 times the amount that you bet on it. Lot of fun there. You don't have to set projections. You don't have to play against other teams. There's no lineup to change. It's just more or less on those players that you choose. It's easy, and you can do it for any of the major sports. I mean, even some ones that are pretty small. And we know the basketball is going on in a number of ways. March Madness will come around as well. But right now, it's all about football all the time. It's easy. It's 60 seconds or less, fast, safe withdrawals, and it's available in 30 states plus Canada. And all you got to do is get that PrizePicks, the app, or get to prizepicks.com and get in there. Use the code Locked On. That gets you 100% bonus on what you deposit. So if you put in 10, you get 10. If you put in 100, you get 100. The limit is 100. So anywhere up to that, you can get double of what you deposit with the code Locked On at prizepicks.com. At the end of the day, it comes down to Patrick Mahomes being the elite quarterback that he is, and Trevor Lawerence wanting to play into that projection, because a lot of people consider him a generational talent. And this is really his – go ahead.
I was just going to say, some people have said that he's the next Andrew Luck. And Dan Orlovsky has talked about him being the next Andrew Luck. And that's pretty high praise. Luck was a very good quarterback for quite a long time. So I do think that plays into this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. What I did overnight is I ran through some concepts to kind of check and see not just what I thought from the first Chiefs meeting, but what's happened to him across the season as well as against the Chargers this last weekend. And it does remain pretty consistent. What we saw against the Chargers when under pressure, he had a couple of interceptions, no touchdowns, right? That kind of goes hand in hand with what he's done through this season. When he is under pressure, he's thrown 4 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be blitzed, but when he is pressured. So that, I think, alleviates the Chiefs from having to overload blitz all day long, because if you can get those matchups where your front four can get pressure on him, it generally leads to a diminished performance from Trevor Lawerence. That's just what the numbers show. At the end of the day, blitzing is effective as well. So when you just break it down, when he's blitzed and he's not blitzed on the season, it's 21 touchdowns, 7 interceptions when not. And when he is, it's only 8 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. So it comes really back to nearly a 50-50 proposition that if you get him under pressure, you're going to have a chance to take the ball away. There's nothing more straightforward than what we talk about every week about getting pressure has to be the number one thing they do this week. Do you see any reason to be concerned about what the Chiefs have?
No, and that is very interesting considering what I thought we were going into the season with. Kansas City producing the second most pressure in the NFL this season or second most sacks in the NFL this season was not something I expected to happen. Dana has taken a big step forward. Dunlop has been very good. And it doesn't just pressures matter, but it's not just pressures. It's can you get your hand up and affect a pass? Kansas City's been very good at that too. Dunlop and Karlaftis in particular have been very good about batting down passes. So that's something to watch in this game as well. Even if they're not able to get home, can they affect the passing lanes with Trevor Lawrence?
I think that's critically important as well. When you take a step backward and just think about what plays they're running, how are they doing this? It is, I think, very much the evolution of the league to go away from playing under center. I think we've seen that with Patrick, and I think we talk about his numbers pretty regularly. Interesting numbers on Trevor Lawerence as well is that 1,200 yards, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions when running play action over the course of this season. That usually is going to be much more drastic in what the play action gives you in terms of the defense's commitment to biting on that play action. But he, again, is nearly a 50-50 proposition when they run the play action. So it's about discipline on the Chiefs' defensive side. It's about understanding that even though they're running that, you're going to have an opportunity on the ball.
And that's interesting to me because Etienne has had a good season. You would think that defenses would be biting on that more, which would allow more openings to be able to do other things. But it hasn't turned out that way for the Jaguars. And I will say this, and I kind of said this yesterday, but it's the way I really feel about this game. Doug Peterson is going to come out with something that Kansas City hasn't seen. Multiple things that Kansas City hasn't seen. And maybe it's stuff that Kansas City has seen, but they don't think it's going to happen because they haven't used it very much. I don't know. Peterson is going to have a bag of tricks in this game, so expect it and just know it's coming.
Yeah, I agree. Doug is going to have the creativity part of it on lock, especially given that I still feel he can be in the experiment phase with this quarterback because I don't think they have the rapport yet that he knows what he needs to do.
Yeah, and look at what his call was on 4th and 1 against the Chargers.
Yeah.
To go and have a chance to win the game. That play design by itself was interesting. Just the design and the lineup of it was interesting because you never would have figured it was going to be a sweep out to the right.
It caught me off guard. I wasn't the only one, but hey, there's more to it. And I think comparing Patrick and Trevor Lawerence is something we have to do for this ball game. Maybe in a couple of years, the comparison will be different. I have one more thing that I should bring up on the backside of this about ball placement and where they look to go, what's been successful over the course of the season for Trevor Lawerence.
But before we get there, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. And get the latest odds and trends for every professional basketball, professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. We've got it all covered at BetOnline.net. If you love podcasts, you can even check those out on BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So the thing that stands out to me, and I just teased it there before the break real quick, because it's a very big discrepancy in success rate on the deep balls. He's not a terribly deep-oriented passer. What is it? I think it came out at – I got to do quick math here. Around 11%. And that math may be off, but hey, that's where it came out right now. The bulk of, in terms of yardage is short, and the chunks plays, they generally start in that medium range, the intermediate 10 to 19 yard kind of flare on the season. Now, last week, that wasn't necessarily the case, because where he was most effective was right there behind. Not behind the line of scrimmage, just over the line of scrimmage. They're right in the center. 17 passes were between 0 and 10 yards. So that calls into play what you have to do if you're Nick Bolton, if you're Willie Gay, and if you're one of the safeties dropping down. We've seen them mix and match in the dime, and I do think they will have some dime out there. So it's understanding where the ball wants to go in this particular offense. Do you feel good about that matchup?
Quite honestly, I would say I probably don't feel great about that matchup. I think that that's going to be something that Kansas City has struggled with throughout the season, and I think it could be something they struggle with on Saturday. The thing I find it most interesting about that stat is when you look at 17 passes thrown between 0 and 10, one of the things that you could have said about Mahomes at different times throughout his career is that he's had a lot of short passes. Don't get me wrong. He has been he throws the ball downfield. He likes throwing the ball downfield. But a lot of his passes at different times throughout his career in different games, they've gone a lot of short passes. I think that was partially to get him going and get him going in the right direction and get confidence built early on in his career. I would not be surprised if that's the same reason that they're doing the same thing with Trevor Lawerence. The big question, though, is how do you defend that if you're the Chiefs? You start looking at the weapons that they have, and you know their tight end is phenomenal. I think that is going to be a matchup problem in Ingram. Willie Gay has the speed to be able to run with him a little bit, but it's still a problem. It's still going to be something that you're going to worry about. And the matchups out of the backfield, I think, could also be something that you're going to have to worry about.
Yeah, I agreed. I think that's pretty straightforward to see. The biggest contrast for me is that when you're talking about Patrick, he can go anywhere on the field, particularly with the deep ball. Now, they take roughly about the same percentage of deep pass attempts. Let's see, Patrick was at 9.7, and like I said, 11, just a hair over 11 for Trevor Lawerence. So a little bit more shots taken with Doug and Trevor than it is this season with Andy and Patrick. But it's where they're taken, because Patrick will spread it anywhere. And in the three areas of the field, from sideline to hash and then between the hashes, he's very evenly spread, whereas Trevor Lawerence is not. On the year, he has been very successful going left and center and is very unsuccessful going right. Only 5 completions out of 31 attempts, the most that he's taken at 20-plus yards on the right-hand side. So that plays into the left-hand corner for this Chiefs team, whether that be one of the rookies or if they choose. I think traveling this week may not be as important as it's been in weeks past. We'll see how they approach that. But does that give you an inkling about how to funnel things, how to design the defense to kind of push to the right-hand side of the offense?
That's interesting to me because he's a right-handed QB. You would think it'd be the other way around. But, I think that maybe you try to push things that direction. It's very interesting that it's that specific. Throwing to the right is that big of an issue for him downfield. I do think that maybe Kansas City looks at that and looks at percentages and says, okay, well, maybe what we do is we double over the top on the right-hand side most of the time and let Snead take care of the right corner.
Right.
So, maybe that's the way they go, or maybe they're going to have him travel. And I don't know if he travels, he's going to travel probably with Christian Kirk would be my guess. I can't imagine that you would be going any other direction. And I will say this. I know we're talking about this year's Jaguars team. This team is going to look a lot different next year when they get their wide receiver back that they haven't had all year.
True. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that evolution continues. But for right now, Chiefs don't have to worry about that. In trying to funnel them, I think that sets up for the last thing that I found really interesting about what Trevor Lawerence has done. And again, I went back and looked specifically at the Chiefs contest, but that's 1 out of 17 contests. So and now 18 with them playing the wild card game. So I wanted to take a bigger view. And when I break it down, Trevor Lawerence is 4th in one category that the Chiefs have really been climbing lately. He's behind Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, and Russell Wilson in this particular stat. Can you guess what it is?
No, I'm not even going to try.
Number of passes batted.
Surprising.
It was to me as well. And with the way that
and
Charles
Herbert
Dunlap
Herbert being Herbert on there is even more surprising.
Herbert's the leader with 23 in the NFL.
I understand that, and that makes no sense at all whatsoever.
It's kind of crazy. But I think that's also an aspect. If you can cause some hesitation, especially when they are looking to take a shot. And with Doug, I think you can get a feel for Doug's mind works a lot like Andy's does. So you can kind of feel when a shot opportunity is going to be there. It's just outside the red zone, those kind of things that are there. And if you can then funnel to a place that he doesn't go to very well, particularly the right-hand side of the offense, I think that gives you just a little bit more hesitation for the pass rush to go get some of those pressures and get some of those batted passes. They've been really, really prophetic about it here in the last 6 weeks. I think they can up their game, and I bet they get a couple here against Trevor Lawerence in this divisional game.
Interestingly enough, Trevor Lawerence is also 6'6". It makes a lot of sense with Russell Wilson. It doesn't make any sense to me with Herbert and Lawerence.
What are you saying there, Chris? It's a little height challenge. That's all right. But hey,
yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. It's timing in your opponent. And I think that's really the key here. So I think the play of Lawerence is setting up to be a good match.
Actually, I think the other thing that could be playing into it is if you look at what we were talking about earlier with the short passing game, Lawerence having a lot of shorter passes. Herbert has had a lot of shorter passes this season. Mm-hmm. Those both play into getting batted more because the arc that you're going to be throwing the ball with is going to be a lot less. So yeah. I guess that makes a little bit of sense. And that's a problem the Chargers have. And I know we'll address that at a later time, but they're going to have to get that figured out. They have a guy that could be, I'm not going to call him a Ferrari. I don't know what you want to call him, an Audi or Corvette or whatever. And they're playing him like he's a freaking Yugo at times.
Well, the Chargers are going to be an interesting one too. Last topic before we get out of here. What is your take on them right now?
Interesting, and I really don't know what to think about the whole thought process that they're going to keep their coach. Staley, in my opinion, has done plenty to be told see ya. But it does sound like the Spanos family wants to stay with him. They like a lot of what he's done. But I think what they like more is they want to keep their money. They don't want to be paying another coach. And that's a big problem because one thing I will say, and I said this on Twitter, the Denver Broncos are going to spend on a head coach this offseason. And whether or not they can fix Russell Wilson is questionable, but they're going to be a better team next year because they're going to have a better head coach. And that is going to play into how all this is going to play out next year. The one thing that I want to say before we go on the Jaguars, I wonder how much this is a Cisco get-back game for Kansas City. I really do think those wide receivers are going to be ready to take advantage of different things, and they're going to attack him at times because of what he did last year, or because of what he did last game.
Well, and they absolutely are going to have more weapons to throw at it. We should find out and get confirmation on that tomorrow, folks. So make sure you check back with us. Matt is going to be here with us for Wednesday, and then we get into the series preparations for this ball game. A lot of scouting went into today's show. I'm sorry if we missed any topics that you guys were looking for, or that Chris, you might have had on your mind. I just got deep into the stats for Lord, so we went with it.
No, and I think it's a great deep dive to go look at the two QBs because you're looking at two guys that are coming from basically mentors of the same tree. Yeah. Andy Reid and Doug Peterson are basically, I'm not calling them the same coach, but Peterson comes from Reid's tree. They're very similar in a lot of aspects. The difference is, one of the biggest differences is Peterson, I think, is a little bit more aggressive at times, and I really wish that Andy would take on that aspect.
Yeah. The evolution of one Andrew Reid. We'll get to that and more with Matt tomorrow. Thank you guys for spending your time with us. Make sure you like, sub, and hit the bell on YouTube. Check out our sponsors and check out the Locked On NFL feed where you can get all the information about the league across it. Everything that you want to know is over on that feed, so check it out. And hey, hit the Locked On NFL Draft Show as well. Thanks for spending your time with us today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.